You might have used expanding foam, but have you heard of or used expanding foam tape? In today's video, I'm going to show you a really good draft eliminating use for this tape. So I'm back in the family bathroom today that I had a lot of fun ripping apart and renovating a couple of years ago. But I've got to confess, I made a bit of an error when it came to the skirting. Now the floors in this property, it's an old Victorian property, they are very uneven. What I should have done when I installed this skirting, which is basically 6x1 plain timber with a rounded over edge, which I did myself on my 1/2 inch shank router, I should have scribed the skirting to the floor to make it nice and flush at the bottom, but I didn't. And possibly I didn't care too much about it because I thought having the skirting slightly raised from the floor would assist with cleaning and painting, I suppose, of the skirting board. But what I've ended up with is this big gap here, which at its highest point is just over 10mm. And the problem with this is I get quite a lot of draft coming in underneath the floor. Now clearly what I should have done, which I know now, which I didn't know then, was I should have sprayed expanding foam between the insulated wall and the floorboards before putting the skirting boards on. But I didn't, and I've now got a problem to solve. So as far as I see it, I've got a couple of options in this situation. Option number one is take the skirting board off and then re-scribe the skirting board properly to the contours of the floor. It's a lot of effort and work to do that, and quite frankly I've got other priorities now, like getting back into the bedroom that we moved out of in February. Option number two would be to spray expanding foam in between the skirting and the floorboard in an attempt to insulate the gap. But that would be messy. There's no guarantee that that expanding foam isn't going to splurge out all over the floor, and in any event the colour of the expanding foam will always be wrong and will be quite noticeable. So that's how I came to option number three, this expanding foam tape. Now this has been on my radar for some time now, since my carpenter mate John told me he used it to seal around a new PVC window he installed at his house. It's particularly good for applications like that, and also for sealing around oak frame windows, where in a lot of cases you're not wanting to, like I do here, put a render bead around the outside of the window to finish it off. They say it produces a better weatherproof seal also than expanding foam out of a gun. And this foam tape, I'm told, reaches full expansion within an hour. I bought my tape from these people. No other reason than just a bit of Googling. And because my gaps range from 2 to about 10mm, I bought these two levels of expansion, a roll of 1 to 4mm and a roll of 5 to 12mm. Tapes obviously come in a variety of widths, but I didn't want the tape to be too deep, so I chose the 10mm version. The one thing I would say to you is carefully scrutinise the gap that you need to fill and make sure you find the right tape to fill that gap. Sounds obvious, but this is the 5 to 12mm expanding foam I bought, and this the 1 to 4mm, and this is how the 5 to 12mm expands. That's showing total expansion of 27mm, and the same with the 1 to 4mm, which expands to just under 10mm. So it's important you understand how big that gap is in the first place, because you want the expanding foam tape to slide into the gap without getting caught. So let's crack on with insulating the gap, but try if you can to stay tuned to the end, because I've got some interesting conclusions about this stuff. Without further ado, let's get cracking. As I explained, I've gone for the 10mm version, as there's no point having it any thicker than that. I don't want it sticking out. Plan is it's got adhesive on one side of the foam only. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick the adhesive to the underside of the skirting rather than the floor, because it may be at some point that I take the skirting off, and that way we're not damaging the floor. Now what I've learned today, if you want to preserve the rest of your expanding foam tape roll after you finish using it, it's important to have a roll of duct tape or gaffer tape handy, as you'll see in the video, because the only thing that's keeping this foam tape from expanding is the fact that it's tightly wrapped around the roll. You'll see when you buy the roll that there's a continuous strip of cellophane around the outside to keep it under compression. And by quickly wrapping the remainder of the roll in duct tape, when you've cut off what you need to use, you will preserve the rest of the roll, as you see I've done here. Okay, action stations. I decided to cut off an initial length of 1.7 meters, but in hindsight it would have been more manageable to work with shorter lengths. Right, I'm starting here because I'm slightly worried that the tape is already expanding. So I've got to work quickly, and I'm just setting it back a little distance from the front. When I spoke to Expanding Foam, the company, yesterday, they said that what some people do is they don't even worry about the adhesive. They just thread the tape in and let it do its work. But I've decided I think it's useful to have this adhesive because it does at least enable me to set the tape in the right position. And what I'm also finding is you can stretch the tape a little bit to get it into the gap. Clearly most of the time people are using this for PVC windows, so they put the tape around the perimeter of the window and then they've got a few minutes to get it into position. There's just one section that's a little bit messy here. So I'm just using my metal ruler to push the tape into position. I guess you could apply it without the adhesive because you can see here this foam is already expanding quite massively, and I can press it down to sort of get it into the gap. But I just don't know whether I'd want this foam without the adhesive because obviously it slides around a bit. This run on the other side of the bath is actually much narrower. The gap is sort of 4mm going down to almost nothing. So I'm into the narrower run of tape now, the 1 to 4mm. I'm going to try and work a little bit quicker this time. Alright, that's that done. This is lovely and easy, this one. So that's it, the job's complete, and other than it ruthlessly laying bare the fact that I desperately need to repaint my skirting boards, thank you 4K HD video for that, the expanding foam tape has done exactly what I wanted it to do. You can hardly tell it's there. It's totally expanded to fill the gap, and there's no longer a sort of cold draft coming from underneath the skirting board. I hope this video has given you a few useful ideas for solving those tricky drafty gaps around your house. Oh, and apparently if you put this stuff in the freezer, I'm told, it suppresses the expansion and gives you a few extra valuable minutes to set your tape in place before it starts expanding. So you might try that if, like me, you're using this stuff for the first time. So what do I think about this tape? Well, it's undoubtedly a great product where your final joint is going to be on show, as I said earlier on in the video. And it is, after all, a different product, let's face it, to the expanding foam you get out of a can. Whereas this is a very spongy, soft substance, which I guess makes itself very suitable for joints that are likely to experience a little bit of movement. The foam out of a can is more rigid, albeit still slightly flexible. And what I like about the foam out of the can is, in contrast to the expanding foam tape, which only has adhesive on one side, obviously it expands and glues itself to both surfaces, and also expands around any mechanical fixings that you've put in place. Whereas with this stuff, obviously you're going to be using a much wider tape than this if you're using this for windows, but the mechanical fixing is obviously going to have to be drilled through the centre of the tape. I'll probably still stick to my spray foam when I'm fitting additional windows around this house, but I can see why this stuff has caught on and it's fantastic for jobs like I showed in today's video. So details of where I got this from will be in the description at the end of the video, which, don't forget, you can access by clicking on the little arrow when you're viewing it on your smartphone, or the show more button when you're viewing it on your computer. If you liked today's video, please give it a thumbs up below, and if you're new to my channel, as I always say, it would be absolutely fantastic if you were to subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here. Thank you so much for all your support, it keeps me doing these videos. Thank you very much, and see you soon.